"Prince," said she, "go when you please. But first, don't take it amiss that I give you some advice how you shall behave yourself where you are going. First, I don't think it proper for you to tell the Sultan, your father, of our marriage, nor of my quality, nor of the place you have been. Beg of him to be satisfied in knowing that you are happy and desire no more, and let him know that the sole end of your visit is to make him easy and inform him of your fate." She appointed 20 gentlemen, well mounted and equipped, to attend him. When all was ready, Prince Ahmed took his leave of the fairy, embraced her, and renewed his promise to return soon. Then his horse, which was finely caparisoned, and was as beautiful a creature as any in the Sultan of India's stables, was led to him, and he mounted it with an extraordinary grace. After bidding the fairy a last adieu, he set forth on his journey. As it was not a great way to his father's capital, Prince Ahmed soon arrived there. The people, glad to see him again, received him with such acclamations of joy, and followed him in crowds to the Sultan's apartment. The Sultan received him and embraced him with great joy, complaining at the same time with a fatherly tenderness of the affliction his long absence had been to him, which he said was the more grievous for fortune having decided in favour of Prince Ali, his brother. He was afraid he might have committed some rash action. The prince told a story of his adventures without speaking of the fairy, whom he said he must not mention, and said, The only favour I ask of your majesty is to give me leave to come often and pay you my respects, and to know how you are." "Son," answered the Sultan of the Indies, "I cannot refuse you the leave you ask me, but I should much rather you would resolve to stay with me. At least tell me where I might send to you if you should fail to come, or when I think your presence may be necessary." "Sir," replied Prince Ahmed, "what your majesty asks of me is part of the mystery I spoke of. I beg of you to give me leave to remain silent on this point, for I shall come so frequently that I am afraid I shall sooner be thought troublesome than accused of negligence in my duty." The Sultan of the Indies pressed Prince Ahmed no more, but said to him, "Son, I penetrate no further into your secrets, but leave you at your liberty. However, I can tell you that you could not do me a greater pleasure than to come by, and by your presence restore to me the joy I have not felt in this long time. You shall always be welcome when you come, without interrupting your business or pleasure." Prince Ahmed stayed but 3 days at his father's court, and on the 4th returned to the fairy Paribanu, who did not expect him so soon. A month after Prince Ahmed's return from his visit to his father, the fairy Paribanu observed that the prince, since the time that he had given her account of his journey, his discourse with his father, and the leave he asked to go and see him often, never talked of the Sultan as if there were no such person in the world, whereas before he was always speaking of him. She thought he forbore on her account. Therefore she took an opportunity to say to him one day, "Prince, don't you remember the promise you made to go and see the Sultan your father often? For my part, I have not forgotten what you told me at your return, and so put you in mind of it, that it may not be long before you acquit yourself of your promise." So Prince Ahmed went the next morning with the same attendants as before, but much finer, and himself much more magnificently mounted and dressed, and was received by the Sultan with the same joy and satisfaction. For several months he constantly paid his visits, each time in a richer and finer equipage. At last some viziers, the Sultan's favourites, who judged Prince Ahmed's grandeur and power by the figure he cut, made the Sultan jealous of his son, saying it was to be feared he might inveigle himself into the people's favour and dethrone him. The Sultan of the Indies was so far from thinking Prince Ahmed capable of so pernicious a design as his favourites would make him believe, that he said to them, "You are mistaken. My son loves me, and I am certain of his tenderness and fidelity, as I have given him no reason to be otherwise." But the favourites went on abusing Prince Ahmed, till the Sultan said, "Be it as it will, I don't believe my son Ahmed is so wicked as you would persuade me he is. However, I am obliged to you for your good advice, and don't dispute but that it proceeds from your good intentions." The Sultan of the Indies said that his favourites might not know the impressions their discourse had made on his mind. It had so alarmed him that he resolved to have Prince Ahmed watched, unknown to his Grand Vizier. So he sent for a noted sorceress. "Go immediately," he said. "Follow my son and watch him so well that you find out where he retires, and then return and bring me word." The magician left the Sultan and, knowing the place where Prince Ahmed found his arrow, went immediately thither and hid herself near the rocks so that no one could see her. The next morning Prince Ahmed set out by daybreak, without taking leave of either of the Sultan or any of his court, according to custom. The magician, seeing him coming, followed him with her eyes until on a sudden she lost sight of him and his attendants. As the rocks were very steep and craggy, they were an insurmountable barrier, so the magician judged that either the prince retired into some cavern or an abode of genies or fairies. Thereupon she came out of the place where she hid and went directly to the hollow way, which she traced till she came to the farther end, looking carefully about on all sides. But, notwithstanding all her diligence, she could perceive no opening, not so much as the iron gate Prince Ahmed had discovered, which was to be seen and opened to none but men, and only to such whose presence was agreeable to the fairy Paribanu. The magician, who saw it was in vain for her to search any farther, was obliged to be satisfied with the discovery she had made, and returned to give the Sultan an account. The Sultan was well pleased with the magician's conduct and said to her, "Do as you see fit. I'll wait patiently the event of your promises," and, to encourage her, made her a present of a diamond of great value. As Prince Ahmed had attained the fairy Paribanu's leave to visit the Sultan of the Indies once a month, he never failed, and the magician, knowing the time, went a day or two before to the foot of the rock where she had lost sight of the prince and his attendants, and waited there. The next morning Prince Ahmed went out, as usual, at the iron gate with the same attendants as before, and passed by the magician. Seeing her lie with her head against the rock, complaining as if she were in great pain, he pitied her, turned his horse about, went to her, and asked what the matter was with her, and what he could do to ease. The artful sorceress looked up at the prince in a pitiful manner, without ever lifting up her head, and answered in broken words and sighs, as if she could hardly catch her breath, that she was going to the capital city, but on the way thither she was taken by so violent a fever that her strength had failed her, and she was forced to lie down where he saw her, far from any habitation, without any hopes of assistance. "Good woman," replied Prince Ahmed, "you are not so far from help as you imagine. I am ready to assist you and convey you where you will meet with a speedy cure. Only get up and let one of my people take you behind him." At these words the magician, who pretended sickness only to know where the prince lived and what he did, accepted the charitable offer he made her, and, that her actions might correspond with her words, she made many pretended vain endeavours to get up. At the same time, two of the prince's attendants, alighting off their horses, helped her up, set her behind another, and mounted their horses again, following the prince, who turned back to the iron gate, which was opened by one of his retinue who rode before. And when he came into the fairy's outer court, without dismounting himself, he sent to tell her he wanted to speak with her. The fairy Paribanu came with all unimaginable haste, not knowing what made Prince Ahmed return so soon. He, not giving her time to ask him the reason, said, "Princess, I desire you would have some compassion on this good woman," pointing to the magician, who was held up by two of his retinue. "I found her in the condition you see her in, and promised her the assistance she stands in need of, and I am persuaded that you, of your own goodness, as well as upon my entreaty, will not abandon her." The fairy Paribanu, who had her eyes fixed upon the pretended sick woman all the time the prince was talking to her, ordered two of her women to take her from the two men who held her, and carry her to an apartment of the palace, and take as much care of her as of herself. While the two women executed the fairy's commands, she went up to Prince Ahmed and whispered in his ear, "Prince, this woman is not so sick as she pretends to be. I am very much mistaken if she is not an impostor who will be the cause of great trouble to you. But don't be concerned. Let what will be devised against you. Be persuaded that I will deliver you out of all the snares that shall be laid for you. Go and pursue your journey." This discourse of the fairies did not in the least frighten Prince Ahmed. "My princess," said he, "as I do not remember I ever did or designed anyone an injury, I cannot believe anyone would have a thought of doing me harm. But if they have, I shall not, nevertheless, forbear doing good whenever I have an opportunity." Then he went to his father's palace. In the meantime, the two women carried the magician into a very fine apartment, richly furnished. First they sat her down upon a sofa with her back supported by a cushion of gold brocade, and while they made a bed for her, the quilt was finely embroidered with silk, the sheets of finest linen, and the coverlet cloth of gold. When they had put her into bed, for the old sorceress pretended that her fever was so violent she could not help herself in the least, one of the women went out and returned soon again with a china dish in her hand, full of a certain liqueur, which she presented to the magician while the other helped her to sit up. "Drink this," said she. "It is the water of the Fountain of the Lions, and a sovereign remedy against all fevers whatsoever. You will feel the effect of it in less than an hour's time." The magician, to dissemble the better, took it after a great deal of entreaty, but at last, holding back her head, swallowed down the liqueur. When she was laid down again, the two women covered her up. "Lie quiet and get a little sleep if you can. We'll leave you and hope to find you perfectly cured when we come again in an hour hence." The two women came again at the time they would, and found the magician up and dressed and sitting upon the sofa. "Oh, admirable potion," she said. "It has wrought its cure much sooner than you would told me it would. I shall be able to continue my journey." The two women, who were fairies as well as their mistress, after they had told the magician how glad they were that she was cured so soon, walked before her and conducted her through several apartments, all more noble than that wherein she had rested, into a large hall, the most richly and magnificently furnished of all the palace. Puribanu sat in this hall on a throne of massive gold, enriched with diamonds, rubies, and pearls of an extraordinary size, attended on each side by a number of beautiful fairies, all richly clothed. At the sight of so much majesty, the magician was not only dazzled, but was also so amazed that after she had prostrated herself before the throne, she could not open her lips to thank the fairy as she proposed. However, Puribanu saved her the trouble and said to her, "Good woman, I am glad that I had an opportunity to oblige you and see that you are able to pursue your journey. I won't detain you, but perhaps you may not be displeased to see my palace. Follow my women and they will show it to you." Then the magician went back and related to the Sultan of the Indies all that had happened, and how very rich Prince Ahmed was since his marriage with the fairy, richer than all the kings in the world, and how there was danger that he should come and take the throne from his father. Although the Sultan of the Indies was very well persuaded that Prince Ahmed's natural disposition was good, yet he could not help being concerned at the discourse of the old sorceress, to whom, when she was for taking her leave, he said, "Thank you for the pains you have taken, and your wholesome advice. I am so sensible of the great importance it is to me that I shall deliberate upon it in council." Now the favourites advised that the prince should be killed, but the magician advised differently. "Make him give you all kinds of wonderful things, by the fairy's help, till she tires of him and sends him away. For example, every time your majesty goes into the field, you are obliged to be at great expense, not only in pavilions and tents for your army, but likewise in mules and camels to carry their baggage. Now, engage him to use his interest with the fairy to procure you a tent which might be carried in a man's hand, and which should be so large as to shelter your whole army against bad weather." When the magician had finished her speech, the Sultan asked his favourites if they had anything better to propose. Finding them all silent, he determined to follow the magician's advice, as the most reasonable and agreeable to his mild government. Next day the Sultan did as the magician advised him, and asked for the pavilion. Prince Ahmed never expected that his father would ask for something which at first seemed so difficult, not to say impossible. Though he knew not how great the power of the genie and the fairies was, he doubted whether it extended so far as to encompass such a tent as his father desired. At last he replied, "Though it is with the greatest reluctance imaginable, I will not fail to ask of my wife the favour your majesty desires, but will not promise you to obtain it. And if I should not have the honour to come again to pay you my respects, That shall be the sign I have not had success. But, beforehand, I desire you to forgive me and consider that you have reduced me to this extremity." "Son," replied the Sultan of the Indies, "I should be very sorry if what I ask of you should cause me the displeasure of never seeing you more. I find you don't know the power a husband has over a wife, and yours should show her love for you was very indifferent if, with the power she has of a fairy, should refuse you so trifling a request as this I desire you to ask of her for my sake." The prince went back and was very sad for fear of offending the fairy. She kept pressing him to tell her what the matter was, and at last he said, "Madam, you may have observed that hitherto I have been content with your love, and have never asked of you any favour. Consider then, I conjure you, that it is not I, but the Sultan, my father, who indiscreetly, or at least I think so, begs of you a pavilion large enough to shelter him, his court, and his army from the violence of the weather, but which a man may carry in his hand. Remember it is my father who asks this favour." "Prince," replied the fairy, smiling, "I'm sorry that so small a matter should disturb you and make you so uneasy as you appeared to be." Then the fairy sent for her treasurer, to whom she said, "Nourgihan, bring me the largest pavilion in my treasury." Nourgihan returned presently with the pavilion, which she could not only hold in her hand, but in the palm of her hand, when she shut her fingers, and presented it to her mistress, who gave it to Prince Ahmed to look at. When Prince Ahmed saw the pavilion which the fairy called the largest in her treasury, he fancied she had a mind to jest with him, and thereupon the marks of his surprise appeared presently in his countenance, which Puribanu, perceiving, burst out laughing. "What, Prince," cried she, "do you think I jest with you? You'll see presently that I'm in earnest. Nourgihan," she said to her treasurer, taking the tent out of Prince Ahmed's hands, "go and set it up, that the prince may judge whether it may be large enough for the Sultan, his father." The treasurer went immediately out with it, and carried it a great way off. When she had set it up, one end reached to the very palace, at which time the prince found it large enough to shelter 2 armies greater than his father's, and then said to Puribanu, "I ask my princess 1,000 pardons for my incredulity. After what I've seen, I believe there is nothing impossible to you." "You see," said the fairy, "that the pavilion is larger than your father may have occasion for, but you must know that it has one property. It is larger or smaller according to the army it has to cover." The treasurer took it down again and brought it to the prince, who took it, and, without staying any longer than the next day, mounted his horse and went with the same attendants to his father. The Sultan, who was persuaded that there could not be any such tent as he asked for, was greatly surprised at the prince's diligence. He took the tent, and after he admired its smallness, his amazement was so great that he could not recover himself. When the tent was set up in the great plain, he found it large enough to shelter an army twice as large as he could bring into the field. But the Sultan was not yet satisfied. "Son," said he, "I have already expressed to you how much I am obliged for the present of the tent you have procured me. I look upon it as the most valuable thing in all my treasury. But you must do one more thing for me, which will be every whit as agreeable to me. I am informed that the fairy, your spouse, makes use of a certain water, called the water of the Fountain of Lions, which cures all sorts of fevers, even the most dangerous. And as I am perfectly well persuaded my health is dear to you, I don't doubt that you will ask her for a bottle of the water for me, and bring it to me as a sovereign medicine, which I may make use of when I have occasion. Do me this other important service, and thereby complete the duty of a good son towards a tender father." The prince returned and told the fairy what his father had said. "There's a great deal of wickedness in this demand," she answered, "as you will understand by what I am going to tell you. The Fountain of Lions is situated in the middle of a court of a great castle, the entrance to which is guarded by 4 fierce lions, 2 of which sleep alternately while the other 2 are awake. But don't let that frighten you. I'll give you means to pass them by without danger." The fairy Puribanu was at that time hard at work, And as she had several clues of thread by her, she took up one, and presenting it to Prince Ahmed, said, "First take this clue of thread. I'll tell you presently the use of it. In the second place you must have 2 horses. One you must ride yourself, and the other you must lead, which must be loaded with sheep cut into 4 quarters that must be killed today. In the third place you must be provided with a bottle, which I will give you to bring back the water. Set out early tomorrow, and when you have passed the iron gate, throw the clue of thread before you. It will roll until it comes to the gates of a castle. Follow it, and when it stops, as the gates will open, you will see the 4 lions. The 2 that are awake will by their roaring wake the other 2, but don't be frightened. Throw each of them a quarter of mutton, and then clap spurs to your horse and ride to the fountain. Fill your bottle without alighting, and then return with the same expedition. The lions will be so busy eating that they will let you pass by them." Prince Ahmed set out the next morning, at the time appointed by the fairy, and followed her directions punctually. When he arrived at the gates of the castle, he distributed the quarters of mutton among the 4 lions, and passing through the midst of them bravely, got to the fountain. He filled his bottle, and returned as safe and sound as he went. When he had gone a little distance from the castle gates, he turned about, and perceiving 2 of the lions coming after him, drew his sabre and prepared himself for defence. But as he went forward, he saw that one of them turned out of the road at some distance, and showed that he did not come to do him any harm, but only to go before him, and that the other stayed behind to follow. Therefore he put his sword back again into its scabbard. Guarded in this manner he arrived at the capital of the Indies, but the lions never left him till they had conducted him to the gates of the Sultan's palace, after which they returned the same way they came, though not without frightening all who saw them. For all they went in a very gentle manner and showed no fierceness. A great many officers came to attend the prince when he had dismounted his horse, and afterwards conducted him into the Sultan's apartment. He was at that time surrounded with his favourites. He approached the throne, laid the bottle at the Sultan's feet, and kissed the rich tapestry which covered his footstool. And then he said, "I have brought for you the healthful water which your Majesty desired so much to keep among your other rarities in your treasury, but at the same time wish you such extraordinary health as to never have occasion to make use of it." After the prince had made an end of his compliment, the Sultan placed him on his right hand, and then said to him, "Son, I am very much obliged to you for this valuable present, also because of the great danger you have exposed yourself to upon my account, which I have been informed of by a magician who knows the fountains of lions. But do me the pleasure," continued he, "to inform me by what address, or rather by what incredible power you have secured." "Sir," replied Prince Ahmed, "I have no share in the compliment your Majesty is pleased to make me. All the honour is due to my wife, whose great advice I followed." Then he informed the Sultan what those directions were, and, by relation of this, let him know how well he had behaved himself. When he had done, the Sultan, who showed outwardly all the demonstrations of great joy, but secretly became more jealous, retired into an inward apartment, where he sent for the magician. The magician, at her arrival, saved the Sultan the trouble of telling her the success of Prince Ahmed's journey, which she had heard of before she came, and therefore was prepared with an infallible means to destroy him as she pretended. This she communicated to the Sultan, who declared it the next day to the prince in the midst of all his courtiers, in these words. "Son," said he, "I have one more thing to ask of you, after which I shall expect nothing more from your obedience, nor interest with your wife. This request is to bring me a man not above 1.5 feet high, whose beard is 30 feet long, who carries a bar of iron upon his shoulders of 500 weight, which he uses as a quarterstaff." Prince Ahmed, who did not believe that there was such a man in the world as his father described, would gladly have excused himself. But the Sultan persisted in his demand, and told him the fairy could do more incredible things. The next day the prince returned to his dear Puribanu, to whom he told his father's new demand, which, he said, looked to be even more impossible than the first 2 requests. "For," added he, "I cannot imagine there be such a man in the world. Without doubt, he has a mind to try whether or not I am so silly to go about it, or he has a design for my ruin. In short, how can he suppose that I should lay hold on a man who is so well armed, though he be but little? What arms can I make of to reduce him to my will? If there are any means, I beg you will tell me of them, and let me come off with honour this time." I'm going to leave it there for tonight.